Hey guys, this is LC Holt, and this is my update for the week of August the 13th. And today I'm going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite movies, which is Black Christmas from 1974. And I have a very good friend of mine here to discuss it with me, Zach Myers. How are you, Zach?
How's it going, LC?
Everything's good, man. Everything's good. We have a good movie to talk about, and I want to definitely jump right into it because there's so much that we could say about this film. It was, like I say, it was made in 1974, and it was directed by Bob Clark and written by Roy Moore, not the crazy one. And
Yeah,
yeah, and Bob Clark is very interesting before we jump into the movie itself because he's famous for having written two classics or having directed two classics, I should say, in of a Christmas theme, but in two completely different genres. He did
and
Black
not too many,
Christmas.
yeah, not too many people even realize that, A Christmas Story is like it's complete opposite.
Yeah, because that was the other one. Black Christmas is a horror film set at Christmas, and A Christmas Story, Ralphie and all. You know, you shoot your eye out, kid. That was also Bob Clark, which is pretty amazing.
Yes, and he was a really talented. He has some. I can go on for days.
Yeah, this was a good time too for Canadian horror in the 70s because you had Cronenberg making his films, and then you had, Black Christmas, which predates Halloween by about 4 years. Um,
Yes,
and it's pretty amazing in that way. But let's jump into the movie because the movie is so fascinating to me on so many different levels. It's extremely well written. It's extremely well shot. I mean, even from the first scene, you're introduced straight to the horror of the film. You have that sort of point of view shot outside of a house. You don't know really where you are, but you're looking through the eyes of somebody who is, maybe not quite there because you can hear his
yeah,
breathing. And I think the DP actually wore the camera on him, mounted it on himself somehow, or maybe even was holding it. And you could
that would
see him. Go ahead. What were you saying?
no, that would make a lot of sense because the way it was shot and that whole opening scene with just approaching like the window and the breathing. People tend to miss how artistic that whole shot is.
Yeah, and you have a guy who's running a camera while climbing a lattice work onto what appears to be about a three-story house, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, yeah, I would have fell off.
Yeah, yeah, and then so you see that, and then as that's happening, we're kind of intercutting between what's going on outside the house of this unusual but obviously unhinged guy climbing up the latticework to the roof, and inside there's a Christmas party going on, and you're introduced to these characters who you're going to spend the next hour and 40 minutes with. So you have Jess, who is, I guess, the main character, played by Olivia Hussey. You have
Yes.
um, you have Barb, who's played incredibly well by Margot Kidder, future Lois Lane. And you have Phyllis, who's sort of kind of their friend. She's a cool chick. And then you have Claire, and Claire is apparently she's what Margot Kidder calls the professional virgin, and she's the one that doesn't quite get the jokes. And Barbara doesn't mince words in how she feels about Claire, to say the least. Because
Yeah.
pretty much right from Jump Street, Barbara is introduced as being the one that will say anything under any circumstances, and she also drinks and smokes a lot. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and smoking, she's an asthmatic, as you learn later on, so she has the self-destructive side to her as well. Um,
Yes.
but yeah, so Barb gets a call from her mother, and her mother is basically kind of thrown over the Christmas weekend she was supposed to spend with Barbara to go off with a boyfriend. And it has one of my favorite lines, one of my favorite off-screen lines in a movie ever, which is where Barbara's on the phone with her mother, and then you cut to the doorway, someone's coming in, and you just hear Barbara off-screen say, "Mother, you're a real gold-plated whore." What a fucking awesome line. You know, this is a, it's the
Yeah,
beginning of, yeah, it's the beginning of very witty dialogue that goes throughout. Because the thing about Black Christmas is when it's scary, but when it's funny, it's really funny. You know?
there is a lot of, and people like you wouldn't think that like you know a 1970s slasher film has so much good comedy in it. And you don't even have to be like a morbid, screwed up individual to find like the jokes funny. You know, you don't have to be crazy. So
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we have I think we were talking about this about 7 minutes into the movie after the introduction of the characters and the sort of the setup of this guy sneaking into the house. You have the first of several telephone calls that come into the sorority house where all these girls are having a party. A call from who they call the Moaner.
yes,
Um,
and then it happens about 7 minutes into the movie where the first phone call actually happens.
Yes, and there's a guy on the line, and it's hard to even describe what he's saying other than just to say he's making all kinds of sounds and voices, and they take it as an obscene phone call. Apparently, they've had a lot of obscene phone calls, but this is like the all-time obscene phone call, you know. Um, and you don't really know who it is. You don't, at that point, it's not even connected to the guy who climbed up the house.
Yeah.
But one thing, it has a couple good lines in it too. Because I mean, you got the line where they're talking about, well, we have to be more careful with this guy because you know there was a girl raped in town, and Barbara goes, you know, one of the infamous lines, you know, darling, you can't rape a townie.
Oh yes. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
which I would love to
Like
know.
whole like attitude, like pretty much throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, I mean, and then there's another great line in that where she's talking about where I think Claire says, "Was that one person?" And Barbara's like, "No, it's the Mormon Tabernacle Choir doing their annual obscene phone call."
Yes, yes, yeah. He full on went like schizo on that phone call. There's like at least two different personalities on that phone.
Right, and you don't even know. Again, it's not connected to the guy at this point who was in the house because you don't know, you know, who this person is. He's not named at this point. It just seems as if these girls are getting an obscene phone call, which you know, living in a sorority house, it probably isn't all that unusual, you
It
know.
probably happens all the time.
Yeah, and then you're on a college campus too, you know, so you have that. But then you have the character of Claire, who is just sort of like she's like, you know, being derided the whole time by Barbara. So she decides to go upstairs while the rest of them welcome Mrs. Mack into the house because Mrs. Mack comes home. She's the house mother of the
The
sorority,
day
and
one.
yes, yes, and she's an interesting character too because unlike a lot of characters in those sorts of situations, you know, she's portrayed as being as loose as the girls, really. You know.
And she actually has a funny character in that movie. She's really funny.
Yeah, and she's got booze all over the house, which is one of her character's traits. You know, every nook and cranny, she's hidden booze. It's in the toilet tank. It's in, you know, she
The
says, "B
toilet
for."
part was actually one of my favorite parts of the movie when she pulls it up out of the back of the toilet, and I was like, oh God. But when you were talking about Claire going up, that's a really great scene in the movie because her going upstairs, this happens 10 minutes into the movie, and when you know she glances over at the closet, and I love how it's shot because you can tell with all the clothes and plastic laying there, and you can kind of there's a gap in between them, and the way it's like closed, and it's closed enough to know that somebody's in there. And then right after that, while Claire is on the phone, that shot from behind plastic just is so artistic, and I think it's very you know I think it's missed by a lot of people how great that shot is.
Yeah, it is very well done. And at that point, you don't know where the guy is. You know he's in the house, but then you discover he's in Claire's closet and he's making cat noises, which draws her over to the plastic.
Yes, yes.
So
then that's where we brought to the first dun 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 kill scene of the movie.
yeah, yeah, and Claire she gets suffocated, and that becomes what is one of the key images, because that's the poster, you know, with her with plastic wrapped around her face, and she's taken upstairs to the attic and put into a rocking chair. So even though the house is full of people, they're downstairs. They're not aware that Claire is dead. She's been taken upstairs, so there's no body, you know. Which is kind of interesting because, you know, that leaves it open because the guy's in the house, he's killed somebody, he's hid her body in the attic, and everybody else is in the house, because I think at one point they say 10 people live in this house, though we don't get to know all of them. We get to know the kind of the group that doesn't go home for Christmas, I guess, you know, the main girls. But around that time also there's a phone call from Jess's boyfriend.
Yes.
Who is Peter Smythe, and he's played by Claire Delay, or Care Delay. And he is, the actor is already famous at this point because he was Bowman in 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, he was.
Yes, he did a great job in that too. So he was good in this one as well.
It's kind of interesting too because, you know, you kind of went from, you know, an astronaut running the first manned operation to Jupiter, who has all these PhDs, and here he is, a graduate student, you know, in music, getting ready for a piano recital. And so anyway, so he goes into this whole kind of conversation with Claire, and then, oh, I'm sorry, with Jess. And then, you know, Jess says there's something we need to talk about, but we need to do it, you know, face to face. And then, you know, the conversation ends with the dreaded exchange where he says, "I love you." And she says, "I know." Yes. Which is probably like the last thing you want to hear before a girl is going to tell you some very important news.
That's when you know something has gone sour in the relationship and something's not good anymore. So it's all bad.
Yeah, exactly. And you have so after that we go to like the next morning, and Mr. Harrison. We should say that Claire's last name is Harrison. So yes. Mr. Harrison, who is Claire's father, arrives, and he's going to pick up his daughter for Christmas break. And there's kind of like this whole thing of, you know, where you're introduced to him. He's kind of a stuffy guy, you know, and he's like the classic dad type situation where he wants to make sure his daughter's in a good situation at college, at the sorority house. And eventually Claire's supposed to meet him. She doesn't show up, and so Mr. Harrison says, you know, gets a guy that looks a lot like that comedian Emo Phillips, says, "Oh, I know where she lives." And so Mr. Harrison goes over to the sorority house and meets Mrs. Mack. And they could be a comedy duo in and of themselves, because you got the straight man, you got Mrs. Mack, who doesn't really give a shit.
I love her because she doesn't. I love how the dead mother does not like the father because, like you were saying, he's so uptight. And I love how every snooty comment he makes, when he turns around, the dead mother like flips him off. I laughed so hard every single time that she would make like a snooty face towards him or flip him off like behind his back. And you know, there's a whole scene of her trying to find, I think it was the cat, and she's yelling and cussing and saying like all kinds of like things. And then the dad kind of pokes his head up, and like he was there the whole time and heard everything. And it's just like, I love that.
Yeah, and there's the infamous poster, the great poster that's on the wall, which
that she tried so hard to cover and did a terrible job at it.
Right, right. Which I would like to have that poster, but it also kind of shows that Claire maybe isn't quite as goody-goody, because they're in Claire's room, you know, because he sees the picture of her boyfriend. It's like, who is that? So Claire's got kind of a naughty poster on the wall with the two people having sex and the peace symbol formation, which is an interesting position. I don't think that's in the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, and that which kind of shows that she's kind of a hippie, you know, free spirit. Obviously, nothing like her father.
Yeah, and you know, there's something about that movie that interests me, and this could be just way off base, but the boyfriend's name is Chris Hayden, Claire's boyfriend. Now, a few years after this movie was made, and I may be going way off the rails here, There was a fellow named Ted Bundy. And Ted Bundy went into a sorority house and murdered a lot of girls in Florida. And the name that he used when he was in Florida was Chris Hagen.
Yes, it was.
Which makes me wonder, did Ted Bundy watch Black Christmas?
I wouldn't be surprised because he in one of the interviews with him, he did say that he grew up loving horror and reading like horror comics and watching horror films and such. So I don't know that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I may be way off base there. But anyway, jumping back into the movie, we do see Jess finally have her conversation with the high-strung music grad student, Peter. And that is where she reveals that she is pregnant with his baby. And, you know, instantly the movie goes into a topic that is controversial now, but probably exceptionally controversial in 1974, if I had to guess, which is Jess saying, you know, I think I might want to have an abortion.
Yes.
And
there's a famous line in that whole scene where it's relevant later on in the movie, which we'll discuss later, but the boyfriend says it's not like getting a wart removed.
yes, that's right. That's a very important line.
Remember that.
Yes, keep that in mind, guys. But you know, I mean, he's just in this mode where he's like, you know, you're being selfish. And she, I mean, this is the beginning of a subplot that goes on, you know, throughout the film. But there is that sort of discussion between the two characters of, you know, him accusing her of being selfish, and her accusing him of essentially being selfish himself. But, you know, she has a pretty good argument ultimately because she says, you know, I have a lot of things I want to do with my life. It's sort of a classic drama scenario, which is what makes it kind of interesting within the context of a horror film. And it's another thing, it's one of those things that sort of brings it up a notch. You know, it raises the whole thing above just a horror movie, because here you have two characters who are talking about a very real life scenario. And it's something that people could, you know, relate to then and now, I'm sure. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, and you know, I fully agree, and it kind of takes the viewer's mind off the killer for a few moments, and kind of, you know, there's a lot of, you know, things happening in between the killings. So
yeah, and that's interesting. It's something that I always liked about really good horror movies, is that you do get to know these people and you realize they have a life beyond just the scenario of a guy killing them. And it goes back to what I was saying before about how well written the script is, because, you know, a lot of movies just go straight for the kills. And this movie is saying, well, okay, we're going to do that, but then these people are going to have lives. They're going to have things that they are concerned about, things that bother them, and things that they're, you know, real life issues that they're facing, which
and wants to build a great story up, you know, not just put pointless, you know, killings. Which, don't get me wrong, pointless killings are fun to watch, but you know, that's why I love, you know, horror films from the 50s through the, you know, 80s, and even they had a lot of character build up, and I feel like, you know, a lot of newer films don't have that.
That's true. That's very, very true. Around that time also, we learned that, you know, Jess gets another call from the moaner, but she's alone, I think, at this point. And this is the first time that the guy on the other end of the line starts to say things starts to say names. He starts to say Billy. He says Billy. He says Agnes. And he starts to talk about
And this happens 25 minutes into the movie, that the second phone call happens.
Yeah, and that's where so 25 minutes into the movie, you don't know the guy's name. And in a way, you kind of still don't, because if the guy is crazy, when he says Billy and Agnes, these might be names that are in his life, or they might just be voices in his head, you know. But kind of the killer has become known as Billy. because he seems to be referring to himself as Billy. But really, I mean, think about it. We don't really know that his name is Billy. We just know that he keeps, you know, kind of yelling these names.
I mean,
And
they kind of lay it and hint it as there's a big possibility this guy could be a schizophrenic.
yes,
So
exactly, because that's kind of how he's acting. He's acting as if he's responding to voices, but he's also kind of playing the characters too. He's sort of playing a female screaming, and he's the guy, and he's starting to say things like, you know, "Where's the baby?" which kind of ties into what's going on with Jess, you know, with
yes,
her, and that becomes an important element, you know, later on. But we also get introduced at the police station to some very interesting characters around this time, because Mr. Harrison has gone to the police station to file a missing persons report on his daughter Claire, and that's when we first meet probably one of Canadian horror's biggest fuck-up characters of all time, Sergeant Nash. And Sergeant Nash is a very he's just a classic like Barney Fife type character. You know what I mean? This is also where we get Barb giving Sergeant Nash the phone number to the sorority house.
oh yeah,
Which reminds us of that once upon a time there were things called exchanges where you actually had to plug, you know, it was computerized in the 70s, but you had to actually kind of plug the lines in. It wasn't a digital thing where you just dial a number, but you had exchanges. So she says that there's a new exchange, which is FE. So you would have FE, and then you'd have the last four numbers of the phone number. And of course, she says that the FE is fellatio, which Nash just goes, oh, okay, because apparently Nash has never experienced.
don't have to believe it.
Yeah, Nash may have experienced fellatio, but he doesn't know what fellatio is. He's never heard it called that. But we see Peter, after this kind of long sort of emotional build-up to his story, completely fuck up the recital, the piano recital he's been preparing for.
Yes.
He is a high-strung individual, and we see he's even more high-strung because he's after he finishes the piano recital, you know, he destroys the piano. He takes
Smashes the shit out of it.
yeah, with a mic stand. He just grabs it and he just starts beating the shit out of the piano, which makes you kind of wonder, okay, well, you got the guy calling, and he's off. He's obviously off his rocker, and he's talking about babies. Where's the baby?
Screwing his head up.
Yeah, you know, I mean, and so it kind of starts to lay the groundworks of, is Peter the guy who's, because he's obviously a little unhinged. So could Peter maybe be the guy who's, you know, calling the sorority house, which is very important later on in the story.
Yes. Yes.
But there's another disappearance that happens in town of a young girl. I think don't they say she's about 14 or 15 years old?
Yeah, I think it's a 14-year-old girl goes missing, and this happens about 40 minutes in, and the town goes on a manhunt for the missing little girl.
Mm-hmm. Right, Mrs. Quaife, I think, is the mother's name, and the girl's Janice, the girl that goes missing.
Yes, yes. And while all of this is taking place, while pretty much the entire town is out looking for this little girl, this is where we brought to another iconic part of the movie, where the den mother hears a noise upstairs, and she goes to see what it is. And this has brought you into about 40 minutes in, 45-ish minutes in, where you get the second kill scene.
Yes. So the second kill scene, 45 minutes in, I can't really think of a modern horror movie that would probably wait that long to kill it, because, you know, but this movie is building up story, it's building up character, you're learning who these people are, and then, as you said, Mrs. Mack hears a noise up in the attic. We'll call him Billy. Billy's making some weird fucking noises up there. She sticks her head up there.
She sticks her head up there, sees Claire's body, and gets a hook swung to the dome.
That's right, and she gets lifted right up into that attic, dead as a doornail.
Right.
So Billy's got victim number two, and again, he stores her away in the attic, so nobody really knows Mrs. Mack is dead, nor do they know that Claire is dead, because their bodies are up in the attic.
And right before she hears this noise, she tells one of the girls that she probably won't be here, that she's going to be going to visit a family member. So her missing doesn't seem very odd.
Right, and so Billy is almost. It almost seems as if Billy has kind of plotted this thing, because they do find the little girl in the park murdered, which draws the people's attention away from the house. So Billy is kind of has free reign in this house. Nobody's looking at this house, because now they're looking in the park because the little girl's found dead. And apparently, from the reaction of the people who found her, you don't see the body, but she's apparently been, fucked up pretty bad. But so after the search party, Jess comes back home to the sorority house, and Peter is already there, which again lays the groundwork of, okay, why is Peter in the house? These people are being murdered in the house. He's off. We've already seen him destroy a piano. So again, it sets him up as sort of the classic red herring of, okay, well, maybe it is Peter, maybe Peter has just completely gone off his rocker. But Jess, she calls the police, and she tells them, I'm getting weird calls, and Nash, the perpetual fuck up, blows it off. But luckily, Mr. Harrison is in the police department, and he overhears the call and is like, well, that's the house where Claire was living. So they're starting to piece together, okay, well, these calls are coming from the house. Claire is missing. There's a kid murdered in the park. And thanks to Mr. Harrison, they're starting to kind of say, okay, well, maybe something unusual is going on here. Meanwhile, you got, Peter demanding that Jess marry him. He's just kind of like, okay, we're going to have a baby. You're going to marry me, and that's it. And she's like, the fuck I am. I got things I want to do with my life. Which, pretty good plot. That whole subplot is pretty awesome. You got Lieutenant Fuller. We should say John Saxon is in this movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say John Saxon, of course, the Nancy's father in A Nightmare on Elm Street. In case you're not familiar with his name, is amazing in this movie. He plays, as always, he plays like the good detective, cop, the sergeant, or whatever his character, I can't remember, but he does an amazing job.
Yeah, he's Lieutenant Fuller, and he's and Nightmare on Elm Street later, he is a Lieutenant Thompson. So it's the first of several famous lieutenants that John Saxon plays in horror movies. But I think from the get-go, his character is suspicious because he sees Peter rush out of the house after Peter demands, that Jess marry him, and Jess is like, hell no. He sees Peter rush out of the house, so already Lieutenant Fuller is thinking, maybe this guy has something to do with this,
Yeah, he's having very, acting very strange and acting very erratic, and that's that becomes his number one suspect.
And they start to tap the phone, which is something that apparently in 1974 was much more complicated than it is now, because it involves them putting a tap on the phone. The guy who from the phone company, it literally has to run back and forth from all these automated exchange boxes. So whenever the killer calls, Jess has to keep him on the line for a certain amount of time. So that kind of becomes its own sort of suspense device in and of itself, But I think around this time also is where we learn that Mrs. Mack actually has a separate phone line in her room, which is a line. That's a line that's just sort of, it's just sort of blown off but it actually is a very important line to the overall, you know, plot.
And this is about an hour into the movie where a lot of this is happening, and where you actually get the third kill scene right there, right before the phone calls, is when the sleeping girl gets killed with the glass unicorn while the kids are Christmas caroling.
Yes, and that's Barbara, the Margot Kidder character. She kind of had a little bit of a drunken hissy fit where she said, you know, because she was kind of bullying Claire, and she goes, "Well, you think she ran off because I bullied her?" And so she has this whole like meltdown with the father there, and she's talking to the father about, well, if she's dead, you know, which is probably a horrible thing for the father to hear. But you know, Mr. Harrison's just sitting there going, what kind of a house are you running, Mrs. Mack? You know, because at that point, when she has this, Mrs. Mack is still alive. At this point, she's kind of gone to bed to sleep off her her intoxication, and like you say, that's when Billy sneaks into the room, grabs that sort of glass unicorn, and while Jess is downstairs listening to the kids singing Christmas carols, just kills Barbara, stabs her dead. Which right before that, you know, Barbara has a dream and wakes up from it. And every time I see that scene, because like I said before, Barbara has asthma. And whenever I see that scene where she wakes up and is gasping, it's hard for me to watch. She's so good at having an asthma attack that it's like I have to try and catch my own breath, you know.
Yeah, she did a really good job in that.
Yeah, I mean it's you know, and then at that time, somewhere around there, Phyllis actually goes to bed, and I think she hears a sound. Does she hear a sound in Barbara's room? Is that what brings her in there? I can't remember.
I can't actually remember either. But I know that because when you were mentioning about the second line, when the phone call started happening, the killer Billy mumbles something about the baby and mumbles, "It's just like getting a wart removed," and that's when they start to think that it is Peter. And Saxon keeps saying, you know, what did he say that, you know, freaked you out? And she really doesn't tell him. But that's kind of when they kind of finalize, like they know for sure, they're positive that it has to be Peter because he said that.
Yes, because that, like we said before, that's a very important line, because basically the killer is in the house, so it's either the killer overheard Peter saying that, you know, killing this baby is like having a wart removed, or probably the easier one for Lieutenant Fuller to believe, which is that it is Peter that's doing the calls and he's repeating to Jess something he said earlier.
Yeah, I should have cleared that up a little bit. That the girls don't really want to believe that Peter could do this, but Saxon is convinced that, you know, for obvious reasons, that he's the culprit.
Yes, yeah, because I think even Phyllis at one point says it can't possibly be, you know, Peter. I mean, Peter's high strung, but he's not gonna, you know, he wouldn't do this, you know. Which what she's talking about at that point is he wouldn't be doing the calls, because again, they don't know that all these people are dead, so they're not saying Peter wouldn't kill people. They're just saying Peter wouldn't make these crazy calls, you know.
Yes.
But yeah, so yeah, Phyllis, for whatever reason, Phyllis goes into Barbara's room, and that is a big mistake, because Phyllis gets killed off screen, as I recall.
Yes.
But Jess finds her. Before we get into how Jess finds her, though, we should probably say that, you know, the cops, they put a guy, Lieutenant Fuller put somebody outside, a guy named Jennings, who was another cop who's, you know, introduced earlier. And he's outside watching the house, sort of a stakeout type thing, because they know something weird is going on there. And Jennings gets killed.
Yes.
And of course, Nash, being Nash, fucks up again, because Lieutenant Fuller, they finally trace the call. Lieutenant Fuller calls Nash and says, you know, okay, you have to call Jess, because she's in the house. You got to tell her that the calls are actually coming from inside the sorority house.
And this it's to like one of my favorite parts of the movie because it makes me laugh hysterically when Nash calls her and says, "Don't don't ask questions. Just go outside. Do not go upstairs." She does every single thing he tells her not to do. She starts asking questions up the wazoo. Then she does not go outside. And what does she do? Yes, she goes upstairs.
Yes, she does go upstairs, and I love. There's a shot that is great where she's on the phone with Nash, and Nash is telling her, don't go upstairs, and they cut to a shot of the stairs, and it's kind of pushing in on the stairs, and that's when you hear Nash say, "Don't go up the stairs." So it's like he's almost become like the audience telling Jess, "Don't go up the stairs,"
And then when she grabs a fireplace poker and to protect herself, and then goes upstairs to find her roommates after told not to do that, and then that's where she opens the door and she finds her roommates dead.
Yeah, and then there's the famous shot at that point where he says, I think he says, "Agnes, it's me, Billy," and she looks at the door, and through the crack in the door, you see this crazy fucking eye staring at her, and
Yeah,
that's
she slams the door into him.
yeah. She slams the door into him, runs downstairs. He starts to have another of a hissy fit, which he had earlier. When things don't quite go right for him, he just goes crazy and starts yelling and screaming. And so he chases her down into the basement. She locks herself in the basement. And at that point, everything goes quiet upstairs. And then you hear Peter outside the house, outside the basement windows, calling for Jess. And so, she doesn't know at this point, for all she knows, it is Peter. And he's just kind of calmed down, and now he's coming for her. And he gets into the basement, and he's coming toward her. And so she feels she has no other choice. So she actually takes the fireplace poker and bludgeons Peter to death in the basement. That leads the audience to believe, okay, well, if Peter was the killer, he's dead, because the cops come, she's traumatized, she's upstairs in her bed, and they kind of drug her. The doctor gives her something to help her sleep, and then you get to probably one of the creepiest endings, I think, in horror movies up until that point, where you see her, lying in bed. Mr. Harrison passes out basically from the shock, even though he doesn't know his daughter's dead. She's still missing, but all the girls in the sorority house are dead, so he can pretty safely assume that Claire is dead somewhere. So he passes out from the shock of it, and they're just like, let's leave her to sleep, which always kind of, I love this ending, and it's the only way you could really do it, but it makes you wonder, like, the cops are just going to leave her sleeping alone in the house where all these people were murdered. Of course, they think that the killer's dead too, so you could say that.
And the camera pulls out from her to, kind of showing the attic, and then slowly going up into the attic to kind of showing, Claire's body up there, and then.
Right, because the cops haven't searched the attic, which is where Billy's been hanging out this whole time. So Claire and Mrs. Max, poor ass, they're just sitting up there in the attic, dead as doornails, with a house full of cops. So yeah, and then you have that, and then eventually it pulls out to show the whole sorority house, and as the film ends, with Jess inside by herself, and as the film ends, you hear the phone ringing. And you kind of know, okay, well, Billy wasn't Peter. And in fact, Billy is probably still in the attic with Jess down below, and she has no protection. And so
I love that, how the ending credits just go while you're listening to the phone ringing, because you're just left with, oh shit. Like, the killer's not dead. The boyfriend was acting a little crazy, but was innocent. And it's a great plot twist.
Yeah, poor Peter, man. I mean, I kind of felt for Peter in the long run. He's a little wacky, but he was just high strung. I mean, when I was in college, I knew a lot of like artistic type people, and it wasn't unusual for them to be that level of you know, wacky. But
Yeah, they're passionate about a lot of things. When they're really passionate about something, they're, you know, they go, you know, strength towards it. So, but I felt his character too, and I felt like, you know, he got the short end of the stick throughout the whole movie.
yeah, yeah. I mean, because I don't know how an audience would react the first time they saw it, because it does lead you to believe that this is probably Peter. Um, you know, so by the probably on the second viewing, you probably have a lot more sympathy for old Pete Smythe. Um, Even though he is kind of a jerk with Jess, where he's like, "Wow, just forget about your life and your career and your education. You know, screw that shit. Just marry me. You know, and we'll have a baby." Which probably not the best route to take as the fellow in that situation, but you know, it was the '70s. What can you say?
I mean, that's true. I mean, he didn't deserve to get his ass beat with a fireplace poker, that's for sure.
Yeah, by the mother of his child, she beat him to death with a fireplace poker. Can you believe that?
He bashed a piano, and then she bashed him.
Yeah, yeah. He should have brought his music stand over. At least he would have had a fighting chance.
Yeah, because he really he was awesome with that thing, man. He was really swinging away with that.
Yeah. Oh man, he was a ninja with his music stand. But you know, I kind of want to talk briefly about. I don't even know if it's worth mentioning, but they made a remake of this movie, and this was
Horrible remake where the guy was like yellow.
yeah, as is generally the case with Hollywood remakes of classic films that are kind of subtle and nuanced. They had to go way over the top with this fucking remake, because in this remake,
So much shit into that it was pointless.
yeah, I mean, he has, you know, Billy, you see Billy right off the bat. You learn Billy's background. For some reason, Billy has jaundice, so his skin is totally yellow, which, you know, how that adds to the story. So basically, what they do is they take everything that was scary about the original and they just strip it away right from Jump Street, and then they just jump in there with really everything is over the top. There's nothing subtle.
Everything that's good about the original movie, we're just gonna take it out. Who needs that? And we're gonna make up our own crap that makes no sense, and we're just gonna, you know, wing it from there.
And it's almost like a parody, you know, when you watch it, because the kill scenes are really bizarre in that remake. Like where the one I always think about is the cops in the car who are watching over the house. You know, Billy in the remake jumps into the car and like slashes her throat. You see a shot outside the car of the windshield, and the windshield just explodes with blood, as if when your throat gets slashed, your body just explodes. But everything.
Well, I'm still not convinced that you could kill someone with a you know, candy cane.
Did he do it with a candy cane? That's so stupid.
At least one kill scene in that movie where he yeah, because he sucked it on the candy cane. He sucked it till it was like sharp, and then he stabbed the guard, and they gave him like, I think it was like chicken with like Christmas cookies or something like that, and then he later on like makes Christmas cookies out of the person's skin, and I was just like, what the hell am I watching?
Yeah, you were watching a waste of celluloid. I think it's all I can say about that.
I don't think I knew what I was watching until like more than halfway through the movie. I was like, wait, the hell is this?
And that movie with the remake was done by James Wong and Glenn Morgan, the guys that started out on the X-Files, did great X-Files episodes. Then they did that, yeah, they did that movie Willard, and
yeah.
with Crispin Glover, and then after that they did what was that movie with the kids in that airplane explodes? They made so many of them where they see the future and the airplane explodes. Final Destination.
Oh yes.
Yeah, they did that one too, and then they did Black Christmas, and you know, ruined a classic. And then I'm sure they did. Oh, and I know the other one they did. They did that Jet Li movie, The One. where there were two Jet Lis.
Oh,
Yeah. Have you seen Jet Li lately, man? Jet Li looks horrible.
does he?
Yeah, I think he has a I mean, not to go off on a whole different topic, but he has a some sort of a disease. He looks like an old man. You know, he's looked so young for so long, Jet Li did. Uh, but
The
anyway,
sad thing is, you could still probably kick someone's ass.
oh yeah, I still wouldn't fuck with Jet Li. I mean, I don't care if he's 112 years old. He would kick my ass in 5 seconds flat. But at least he doesn't have yellow jaundiced skin like Billy did.
Yeah, that. What the hell?
But so, what would you say about Black Christmas? I'm talking about the original one now, not the sacrilegious.
I was gonna say shit, but no, the original. Yeah, the original. I think it's a great slasher film for the 1970s, and it's a great holiday film. You know, I watch it every Christmas, and it's one of my favorites. And like I said, I don't think you could put John Saxon in anything and it'd be terrible. I mean, and Bob Clark's an amazing director. You know, I love the shots he chooses to use, and I just he knows how to make a good movie. And so what would be your opinion?
Well, you know, it's one of my all-time favorites. I like how it's structured. I like how it's shot. I love the script. I think the script is wonderful. One of the all-time great scripts. And you know, I think it's a classic. I think everyone should watch it.
Yeah,
And I hope people do watch it. I hope probably should have said at the start of this there would be spoilers. I hope I didn't spoil it for anybody who didn't. But if you haven't watched it yet, for shame, you should watch it. You
yeah,
should have watched it.
seriously. And if you don't own the movie, it's okay. You can go onto YouTube, and the director's cut is full-length director's cut is on YouTube. Go and watch it if you don't own it, or go out and buy the movie somewhere if you can find it. But it's great. You have to watch it.
Yeah, and I think you could probably that's a famous enough movie. You could probably find that one at various places. But this was kind of a fun. This was something a little different for the show, film discussion, and I had a lot of fun talking about it. So this was a lot of fun, Zach. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. And I love this is a great movie to talk about, and I hope everyone out there had fun, listening to us talk about a movie, because like you and I we're both film nerds, and that's our life. And so I can talk days and days and days on a movie. So this was great. This was, really fun.
Yeah, and definitely I want you all to go check out the 1974, the only version of Black Christmas, if you haven't already. Because, I mean, as a horror fan, you definitely should see it. It's one of my favorites. And we might do some more of these film discussions in the future of other things. But
Yes.
I wanted to ask everybody to subscribe to the channel so you can get all the new, every week we do something live. We have some really cool things coming up for September. And then on into October. And I won't go into it quite yet, but I think you're going to like it. Again, Zach, I want to thank you for being on the show this week.
Thank you for having me, man.
Oh, yeah, it was fun. And all you guys watching, thanks for watching, and I will see you again next week.